The story begins with a man being rushed to the emergency room. He is dying, but his only regret is that he is a virgin. He opens his eyes and is surprised to see a young couple before him. He doesn't understand and finds it unbelievable when the man lifts him and smothers his face with kisses. He is ready to forgive this man's ridiculous behavior as soon as he sees a woman who is blushing. He has never been with a woman, so he thinks his dream is finally coming true. Unable to resist groping her, he lifts his hands, his tiny little hands. He gasps as he realizes he has been born again. However, he still possesses his wits from his past life. His parents are Paul and Zenith Greyrat, a young couple in their early 20s. They name him Rudeus Greyrat, and as time goes on, Rudeus makes the best of his excellent memory. He has learned much about their language so far, but he can hardly keep it in his pants. He would often be found near the laundry bucket wearing women's underpants on his head. He is particularly fascinated by the maid Lilia, who thinks Rudeus is possessed because of his behavior. Rudeus can't figure out which era he has been born into, as they still use fire to prepare food, and candles to light the room. One day he climbs on the stool to take a peek at the outside world through the window, and is mesmerized by Paul practicing sword fighting. But Rudeus loses his balance and falls on the floor with a thud. Zenith and Lilia run to help Rudeus, who surprisingly doesn't cry. But to ensure her son is fine, Zenith casts a spell on him to make the pain disappear. This is the first time Rudeus is introduced to magic, and he realizes he is not on Earth as he initially thought, but in a world with swords and sorcery. Rudeus grows stronger day by day, and one day he stumbles upon a set of 5 books stacked away in an old chest. He is instantly attracted to these books as he claims to be a book lover who owned more than 1,000 books in his previous life, even if they were pornos. He soon realizes he can't read the characters, and to read these 5 books, he needs to learn a new language. A year has passed since, and Rudeus can now read the characters to some extent as Paul occasionally reads the books to him. One of the books is The Magic Manual, which Rudeus is currently reading. He tries to find out if he possesses magical powers and blatantly recites a spell thinking he will fly, but instead he ends up making a water ball. Now that he knows he definitely has the power, he tries again. Using his skill of combining combo attacks as he did while playing video games in his past life, he creates another water ball. He is surprised that he could do it without chanting the spell, but that is all his little body can take, and he soon passes out and the water ball lands on his pants. Zenith holds an embarrassed Rudeus and comforts him as she thinks he wet his pants, but he can't explain what actually happened. As he grows, he keeps practicing using magic without chanting. He questions the authenticity of what is written in the book, as it says the spell should be chanted before casting the magic, but he can do it without uttering a single word. Rudeus knows his magic has gotten stronger, and he wonders if there is a limit to that, but it is too early to assess it. He would be lying if the thought of being special didn't cross his mind. He theorizes if he keeps training, his powers will grow leaps and bounds by the time he reaches adulthood. So he decides to train hard until his growth period ends and finally manages to make his water balls fly. He jumps and celebrates because his hard work is paying off, and he has mastered entry-level magic. Feeling motivated, Rudeus thinks it is time to move on to intermediate magic. He reads a chant aloud and inadvertently creates a massive water ball that he sends flying several feet ahead, and in the process, destroys the entire wall of the attic. Hearing the loud noise, his parents and Lilia rush to see what happened. While Paul thinks it was a monster attack, Zenith figures out what must have happened. Rudeus thinks he'll be reprimanded for using magic, but to his surprise, Zenith squeals in delight. She wants Paul to hire a teacher for their son, whom she considers a genius, but Paul reminds her of her promise of making their son adept at sword fighting. Lilia puts an end to their argument by suggesting Rudeus take both classes at different times of the day. They send word out and get a response. Unlike what they had imagined, a very young girl stands at their doorstep, and she introduces herself as Roxy Magurdia. Rudeus is more than happy to be trained by her, and if given a chance, he also wants to marry her. Roxy is skeptical about Rudeus being special because every parent thinks their child is special, but she changes her view once she gets to know Rudeus and sees him using magic without chanting the spell. Their first day of training involves destroying and healing Zenith's tree, much to the mum's displeasure. After the training, Zenith invites Roxy to join them for dinner. They have prepared a feast, and after a long time, Rudeus feels lively and blessed to have gotten a second chance in life. He is ready to move forward and work hard to make the most of what he has, unlike in his previous life, which went to waste. He is ready for a restart. In a flashback at his father's funeral, while everybody was mourning, pre-reincarnated Rudeus was busy rubbing one out in his very filthy room. His siblings had had enough, and he was thrown out of his house that day. It was raining heavily. and he didn't know where to go, so he kept walking and stopped at a traffic signal. A group of 3 students arguing on the opposite side of the road caught his attention, and before he knew it, he leapt in front of the speeding truck heading towards them, and everything went bright. Rudeus wakes up with a jerk and realizes he was dreaming of the last moments of his previous life. He had fallen asleep after running out of mana while practicing earth magic. It has been 1.5 years since Roxy arrived at his house, and he has learned a lot of intermediate magic from her. However, he would occasionally struggle to contain his mischievous urges. One night, after delivering a lecture on demons, Roxy tells Rudeus she is also a demon. They can be distinguished by their hair color, and it is probably the reason why Zenith and Paul were surprised to see her on the first day. However, she warns Rudeus to maintain distance from people with emerald green hair and red gemstone on their forehead. She further scares him by saying that getting too close to these demons may result in his family's elimination. Rudeus promises to be careful. At just 4 years of age, Rudeus's hard work has paid off, and he has become adept at magic. However, he has a long way to go when it comes to sword fighting. It is said old fears are difficult to overcome, which is probably why Rudeus didn't get along with his classmates in his previous life and was often bullied by them. The experience of being bullied led him to live a life as a loner. Even now, he cannot bring himself to approach kids his age, so he hides when 2 village kids playing by themselves look at him. Roxy comes to see if he's doing fine and tells him about the kingdom of Renoa, situated on the far side of the mountains. The Renoa Magic University, considered the world's #1 magic school, is located there. She recommends he takes modern and advanced courses there if he wants to go down the road of magic, but Rudeus is a bit hesitant. The new world that Rudeus lives in has a tradition of celebrating their birthday every 5 years instead of every year like on Earth in his previous life. Rudeus is 5 years old, and his family prepares a feast for him. His father gifts him a brand new sword and a long lecture on how a sword can come in handy in all sorts of situations, unlike magic. But he gets a warning from Zenith, and his speech abruptly ends. It is his mum's turn, and she presents him with a book on magic. Rudeus is very happy as the book is exactly what he wanted, and Zenith can hardly contain her excitement upon hearing this. Roxy gives him a wand with a red-coloured magic stone on top. The wand is used to amplify his magic powers. Roxy feels her work is done there as she has taught him everything she could. She informs him she will conduct his graduation exam the next day. Rudeus then remembers in his previous life, the bullying at school forced him to never leave his house. For the next 20 years he remained confined in his home, until one day when he was kicked out and then died. The next day Roxy tells him they will conduct the test outside the village. Fear grips Rudeus and he hides behind Zenith, but Roxy encourages him to let go of any fears holding him back and makes him sit on her horse while she mounts at the back. Together they set off on their journey. Rudeus soon realizes that his fear is irrational as no one in the village will look down upon him. His nerves ease a bit and he greets everyone on their way. Once they arrive in an open field, they stop, and Roxy explains she will cast saint-level water magic. She tells him to observe her and replicate the spell. Roxy casts the spell and the atmosphere suddenly changes around them. The sunny blue sky turns grey as it gets covered by dark clouds, when suddenly a loud neigh breaks Roxy's concentration, and she realizes her horse has been struck by lightning. She uses healing magic on her horse and asks Rudeus to not say anything about this. It is Rudeus's turn, and Roxy stays back to protect her horse this time. Rudeus casts a spell much bigger than Roxy's and passes the graduation test with flying colours. This earns him the title of Water Saint as a ranked magician. That evening, Roxy bids farewell to the family. Teaching Rudeus has made her realise she has much more to learn, so she must travel the world. Zenith and Paul bawl their eyes out while Rudeus runs after her and thanks her once again for everything she has taught him, and most importantly, for taking him out in the world, which could never have happened on his own. She gave him all the gifts he needed to venture out into the world. So starting the next day, he decides to go out and play. His parents couldn't be more proud of him for taking the initiative, as they were worried he might end up living at home his entire life. Rudeus is enjoying his stroll along the fields when he notices 3 kids throwing dirt at someone. He hates bullying but doesn't interfere until one of them picks up a rock and is about to throw it at the person. Rudeus stops the attack by throwing water balls at them, which makes them give up and leave. Rudeus rushes to the child's aid and finds that he's just a little boy with green hair, but no red gemstone on his forehead. Rudeus breathes a sigh of relief and helps him clean up. The boy tells Rudeus that his dad is a half-elf, but his hair colour matches neither of his parents. Saying this, he starts sobbing, and Rudeus tries his best to calm him down. Once he has cleaned up, they start walking back. and Rudeus extends a hand of friendship after introducing himself. The shy boy introduces himself as Sylph. They play until Sylph's parents arrive to take him home at sunset. Rudeus also returns but finds an angry Paul waiting for him outside the house. He doesn't allow Rudeus to explain what happened and starts yelling at him for what he did to the neighbor's kid. It turns out that one of the bullies from earlier had come with his mother to complain about Rudeus. Paul had promised to look into the matter, which explains why he was so mad at his son. But when Rudeus refused to apologize as he was being denied his right to be heard, Paul slaps him. With the wit that Rudeus possesses from his previous life, he sarcastically says that if next time he sees 3 people bullying someone, he won't stop them. In fact, will join them in bullying someone who is not defending himself. Paul finds himself in a pickle and apologizes for acting rashly and not giving Rudeus a chance to explain himself. Rudeus forgives him, and they enter the house as if nothing happened. But the incident leaves a mark on Paul as he realizes how mature his son has become. After that day, the bullies came after Sylph a few times, but Rudeus was always there to protect his friend. One of the bullies' mother often came to Rudeus's home to yell at him, but Rudeus believed she visited because she is in love with Paul. Rudeus has been teaching Sylph magic, and his magic capacity has increased a lot in just half a year. Sylph also manages to learn to use magic without chanting thanks to Rudeus. One day after playing, it starts to rain, and they reach Rudeus's home soaking wet. Rudeus proposes they shower and get into some dry clothes, but as Rudeus strips, Sylph hesitates. So Rudeus helps him take off his top, but when he does, he learns Sylph is actually a girl. He is too stunned to explain himself when his father comes after hearing Sylph crying. Paul gives Rudeus a chance to explain himself, but Rudeus just apologizes as he genuinely feels bad for making her cry. Now he understands why he thought Sylph was pretty when he first saw her. Paul also tells him that Sylph's actual name is Sylphiette. Rudeus wonders if she will ever forgive him, and Paul assures him that she will forgive him if he apologizes from the bottom of his heart. Paul takes Rudeus to the kitchen where Sylphiette is sitting. Rudeus apologizes and adds that since her hair has always been short, he thought she was a boy. Hearing this makes Sylphiette wail again, and Paul questions his son's social skills. The next day, while practicing sword fighting, Rudeus seems to lose focus, and Paul thinks it's because he hasn't made up with Sylphiette. He decides to help his son, and with his guidance of being a player, Rudeus is able to make up with Sylphiette, and they become friends again. Soon there is another reason to celebrate in the family. Zenith is pregnant and Paul is fawning over his wife. However, their happiness soon takes a detour at dinner when Lilia also announces she is pregnant. Paul can't contain his guilt and confesses that he is the father, angering his wife. She gets up from her chair and smacks him hard on his face. The atmosphere gets tense after the revelation, and the 2 women sit across each other at the table. Zenith asks Lilia what she plans to do now, and Lilia states that after helping Zenith deliver the baby, she will return to her hometown to raise her own kid there. But Zenith is concerned that Lilia would lose a lot of energy after birth. Traveling on a horse to her hometown, which would take a month, will be strenuous. Rudeus can see Zenith struggling because even though Lilia is a maid, she has done a lot around the house. Rudeus also doesn't want anything to happen to Lilia if she is sent away because she has kept his prized possession, Roxy's underpants, a secret. After much contemplation, Rudeus decides it is time to pay her back for her services, and he approaches a tense Zenith. He convinces her that it is Paul's fault and says that he saw the whole thing. Rudeus tells his mother that Paul forced himself on Zenith. Paul is shocked that Rudeus broke the bro code, but at the moment that lie is necessary to save Lilia. He promises himself to make it up to Paul once things settle. Rudeus convinces Zenith to let Lilia stay and everything works out well, except for Paul, who gets an earful that night. Lilia still doesn't know why Rudeus saved her when she was the one who seduced Paul. She has always thought of Rudeus as being possessed since he would always play with women's underpants and stare at her, but that doesn't matter now. And she promises herself that she will serve Rudeus all her life for saving her. She will also let her child serve Rudeus. Time flies by and the family welcomes 2 baby girls, Norn and Aisha. Rudeus also fixes things with his father. He thinks his dad can be a scumbag sometimes, but that doesn't change the fact that he always goes to Paul for advice about girls. That afternoon, while playing with Sylphiette, Rudeus seems quieter than usual. She asks him what's wrong, and he tells her that he feels stuck in his magic and swordsman skills. He feels he needs to leave the village in order to learn new things. But Sylphiette starts bawling because she doesn't want her best friend to go anywhere. So Rudeus decides to put his plan on hold. Later that night, while Rudeus is lost in his pervy thoughts about Sylphiette, Paul enters his room and gives him a letter from Roxy. Roxy writes that she is staying in the Shironi kingdom and has been hired as a tutor of the 7th prince. She further writes that the 7th prince reminds her of Rudeus because he is also intelligent and a perv. She has also improved her magic skills and wonders if Rudeus has already surpassed her. She suggests that if he has stopped making progress in magic, he should apply for Renoa Magic University. After giving it much thought, Rudeus tells Paul his wish to enroll in the Renoa Magic University. Since Sylphiette doesn't want him to leave, he wants her to come as well. He asks if his father is willing to pay her tuition fees as her family is not that rich. However, Paul refuses because he thinks Rudeus is still young and not fully trained in sword fighting. He also tells Rudeus that they cannot afford to pay extra tuition fees as they are running low on funds. Rudeus understands and asks for Paul's permission to get a job so that he can earn money for Sylphiette's tuition fee until he is old enough to enroll. Paul agrees and Rudeus is more than happy, but little does he know that Paul has planned something big for him. So the next day they are visited by a beast of a woman who is more muscular than Paul. They seem to know each other a little too well, and even Zenith greets her. Suddenly, Rudeus is ambushed by Paul attacking him. After a brief battle, he is knocked out by Paul, and when he gains consciousness, he finds himself in a moving chariot with the beast woman. The woman introduces herself as Ghislaine and welcomes him as they will start working together the next day. Rudeus is confused but dares not to question her. She gives him a letter and asks Rudeus to read it aloud as she cannot read. It is from Paul, who has written the letter to explain what is going on. Rudeus reads aloud that Paul doesn't trust that Ghislaine will be able to explain the situation well to Rudeus as he thinks her brain is nothing but muscles. Ghislaine is enraged and is about to give Rudeus a demo of her strength, but Rudeus handles the situation and says it is just a joke. He continues reading and realizes he is being sent to tutor a 9-year-old lady living in Roa. Paul explains that Ghislaine is the bodyguard and sword teacher of the said household. In return for teaching Rudeus swordsmanship, she would like to learn something from him. He is being sent to the household for 5 years and is expected to help the little girl master basic subjects. During his stay, he is not allowed to go home or write letters to his family. This is because Paul noticed how dependent Rudeus has become on Sylphiette, and he has decided it is not good for her either. So by living an independent life, he will learn a lot, and his family cannot wait to meet the new version of Rudeus. Rudeus understands it is probably best for him and Sylphiette, and wishes that she learns to solve her problems on her own as well. They soon reach a new town and meet many beasts in the household he'll be staying in. He is then introduced to Philip Grey Rat, the mayor of the town and Paul's cousin. Philip sighs when he realizes Paul has omitted to mention some things as usual to get his way. Philip takes Rudeus to meet his daughter and warns that his daughter is selfish and is only close to a few people in the household. He introduces Rudeus to Eris, and as soon as Rudeus sees Eris, a shiver runs down his spine. Eris is fierce, and he can feel it even from a distance. He greets her chivalrously, but Eris is not having it and slaps Rudeus because she thinks he's disrespecting her. Rudeus retaliates and slaps her back to make her feel how he felt. But that somehow activates beast mode in Eris and she pins him down to land several punches on his face. Rudeus manages to throw her off of him using magic and makes a run for his life. As he hides under the table from fire-breathing Eris, he can't help but feel that Eris is the main character from a delinquent manga. He finally manages to lose her and goes to meet Philip, who can't stop laughing. Philip asks if he wants to give up, but Rudeus is determined and doesn't want Paul to laugh at him if he returns. So he devises a plan to trick Eris into studying and describes his plan to Philip. Later, he retires to his room and instantaneously falls asleep. When he wakes up, he finds himself in a wooden crate with his hands tied. Rudeus looks around, appreciating Philip for how real they've made the setup look. It was his plan to teach Eris the importance of learning magic by putting her in a stressful situation. But when a huge man comes and starts beating Eris mercilessly, Rudeus feels the actor is being a little too harsh on her. He also lands a punch on Rudeus but leaves him alone when Rudeus winks at him. Once alone, Rudeus rushes to Eris's aid and heals her using healing magic. Something doesn't feel right, so Rudeus plans to escape instead of fighting. He breaks open the iron bars on the little window and blocks the door. The kidnapper tries to break in and Rudeus threatens to leave her until she promises she will not resort to violence or raise her voice. Eris gives in and promises right before the kidnappers return. As soon as they're out, Eris breaks her promise and starts speaking loudly. So Rudeus leaves her there and starts back on his own. Realizing she isn't out of danger yet, Eris comes running after him and promises never to talk loudly again. They realize they are in the town beside Roa. Rudeus takes the opportunity to make Eris realize how reading and basic math could help her to travel alone and save her life. They board a carriage and return to Roa that night. While walking back, they run into one of the servants of the household and suddenly Eris is taken away by the kidnappers. Rudius chases them and stops their attempt only to find out that the servant is involved in the crime. The servant tries to lure Rudius with the prize money and says he has suffered a lot at the hands of Eris. For Rudius, however, money doesn't matter, and at that point he's thinking of Eris and her safety. He creates fireworks that burst in the sky, and taking advantage of the distraction, Rudius attacks the men head-on and pulls Eris away. Rudius manages to ward off all of their attacks, but when one of them throws his sword at Rudius, he realizes he is going to die. Rudius regrets not learning how to defend himself against the sword and closes his eyes, ready to bear the consequences. All of a sudden, the blade breaks into pieces, and in a split second, the two kidnappers' heads burst open. It was Ghislaine who had rushed to the site after seeing the fireworks. Rudius is awestruck by the sheer power of Ghislaine and can't speak the entire journey back to Eris's home. Ghislaine has the traitor servant tied, and as soon as Philip sees him tied up, he understands what must have happened. Rudius feels bad that, in the end, he couldn't help Eris, and Ghislaine was the one who saved them. He is disappointed at his own abilities and starts to leave when Eris returns to her normal loud self. But she stops him and says she has given an exclusive right to him to address her as Eris, implying she is hiring him as her tutor. A bright smile spreads across Rudius's face, and he returns happy that his efforts weren't a waste after all. The next day, Philip invites Rudius for a game of chess and to discuss the incident that ensued yesterday. It has been decided that they'll tell people Ghislaine solved everything in order to show people that the Grey Rat family has welcomed a Sword King. It is also to ensure that Rudius is kept a secret. Rudius has the opportunity to meet Philip's wife, Hilda, who is colder than Antarctica, and Eris's grandfather, Sauros Grey Rat, an aggressive man who talks with his fists first. He asks Rudius to teach Eris magic, as she seems obsessed with how Rudius could use magic so effortlessly. But Rudius takes a chance and makes Sauros understand that by asking on Eris's behalf, he will be raising her into an adult who won't ask for anything herself. Sauros finds his argument rational and calls for Eris. He asks her to request that Rudius teach her magic. When she finally manages to utter those words, Rudius freezes, shocked that she acted like a bunny girl just in order to ask. Rudius soon starts teaching Ghislaine and Eris magic while he sharpens his swordsmanship skills with Eris under Ghislaine's guidance. It has been a month since he started tutoring Eris, but Eris doesn't listen to Rudius's lessons when it comes to math, reading and writing. She is only interested in magic, and when she's bored with her studies, she would just run away in the middle of class. Even if he found her, she would punch him and run away again. One day when she runs off in the middle of the lecture, Rudius goes after her and finally finds her sleeping on a stack of hay in the barn. He tries waking her up, but when she doesn't, he lets his hands run amok until Eris wakes up and sees them in her skirt. She makes sure to punch his soul out of his body. Left with no choice, he goes to Ghislaine and cries to make her step in. Eris finally sits to study, but more than that, she complains about how boring the lecture is. So Ghislaine tells a story about how she ran into trouble because she didn't know basic math and got lost in the desert. She had to survive by eating monster poop, which led her to suffer from diarrhea and nausea. Oddly enough, the story motivates Eris, and she asks Rudius to continue his lesson. Days fly by, and soon enough it is autumn. One day Eris drags Rudius to accompany her to visit the market of Roa. There, Rudius makes a note of the prices of the products, and a shopkeeper offers him an aphrodisiac potion which arouses women. When Eris interrupts and asks what it is, he recovers and poses a math problem for her to solve. Later that day, Rudius bestows an important life lesson on Eris when she offers to buy him a book that he really wants, but with her father's money. He refuses and says he'll take the offer when Eris offers to pay with money she has earned. Eris surprisingly understands and doesn't throw a tantrum as she would normally do. Impressed by her composure, Rudius promises to ask Philip to give Eris an allowance every month, bringing a smile to Eris's face. It is already evening and the three are returning when Rudius gets spooked by a giant shadow casting over them. He is even more surprised to see a flying castle. Ghislaine explains it is the armoured Dragon King, Perugius's sky castle. Seeing Rudius confused, Eris explains that Pergius is one of the three heroes who defeated demon god Laplace, an evil warlord who tried to exterminate the human race. Rudius feels he has heard the story somewhere and suddenly remembers the book that Paul used to read to him, which he thought was a fairy tale. He is excited and hopes he gets to go to the castle someday. After that day, Rudius begins his policy of giving Eris one day off a week, which seems to work well as Eris appears to be in a good mood lately. She even presents Rudius with a medicine bottle he seemed interested in the other day when they went to the market. Rudius starts sweating, seeing the bottle before him, and Eris asks what it is. Rudius dodges the question and tries running away but gets caught by Ghislaine, and in the process the bottle slips through his hands and breaks upon falling on the ground. Rudius sulks and inadvertently mentions that it is an aphrodisiac. He soon realizes he is in trouble and starts running, but Ghislaine again catches hold of him and Eris tickles him, forcing him to tell her what aphrodisiac is. But Rudeus will endure anything to cover his perverted secret. The next day, Eris practices her sword fighting with Ghislaine. She tells Eris that she will be advanced rank soon. Rudeus points to himself and wonders if the same goes for him. Ghislaine looks uncomfortable and Rudeus sighs. However, he doesn't mind and keeps working hard to teach magic to Eris and Ghislaine. One night, Rudeus is busy perfecting Roxy's figure using his earth magic when he hears a knock on his door. Edna, Eris's dance teacher, has come to ask Rudeus to share his teaching time with her, so she can prepare Eris for the big dance at her 10th birthday party. It will be a big event and many nobles will be there. Rudeus's true pervy nature slips out for a split second when he realizes he'll get to see Eris dance, but he quickly gains his composure and gladly agrees. Since he now has free time, Rudeus meets with Philip and tells him he wants to learn another language. He decides to learn the beast god language, and Philip gets a little too excited about having servants from the beast race. Rudeus asks for Philip's permission to borrow books from his library along with books from other continents. That evening, Rudeus writes a letter to Roxy, telling her about his progress and his plans to learn new languages. But he soon realizes it won't be such an easy task since he doesn't understand a single word when he starts reading. Just then, he hears yelling outside his room. He steps out and sees Eris running away from her dance teacher because she's struggling with her lessons. Edna tells Rudeus that if Eris continues like this, she will embarrass herself in front of the guests. Edna makes Rudeus feel guilty, and he agrees to talk to Eris. Rudeus finds Eris lying behind the shed. He asks her if she quit dancing, but she kicks him in his face. He says he understands that giving up is an easy way out, since he did it a lot in his previous life. He tells her that he decided not to repeat the same mistakes and persuades Eris not to give up. Rudeus tells her he's trying to learn languages from different regions but can't understand anything. Even so, he will not give up and offers to help Eris in her dance lessons. They start to practice together, but he realizes she is way worse than he thought. Later, Rudeus asks Ghislaine to help him understand the beast god language, but she is no help. He feels stuck again, but he suddenly receives a package. The package is from Roxy with a letter. It says that she understands how unique and complex the grammar of the beast god language is, so she made a 1,000-page textbook to help Rudeus. Rudeus is overwhelmed by Roxy's gesture and feels the need to lick her feet the next time he sees her. It seems more of a fetish than showing his thanks for her help. A few days go by and it is Eris's 10th birthday. It's a day of festivities with a lot of delicious food and musicians entertaining the guests. Eris looks charming in her dress, and soon her grandfather, Lord Sauros, announces the main event of the evening, Eris's dance. One of the guests asks Eris to dance with him, but it doesn't go as planned and they both end up falling. This shocks the guests, and they whisper to each other about how Eris is an idiot. Rudeus can't stand seeing Eris embarrassed, so he volunteers to dance with her. It doesn't go well at first, but Rudeus asks her to implement the steps they learned in their sword fighting lessons. This makes Eris dance very well, and they get applauded for a wonderful performance. Chick magnet Rudeus accepts compliments from 3 girls, but Eris smacks him on his head and drags him away. Later that night, Rudeus presents Eris with a magical wand as a gift from a master to his disciple. He also gives one to Ghislaine, who gladly accepts it. She then gifts Eris one of her rings as her birthday gift to keep men at bay. Even though it is a superstition, it seems to work on Rudeus, and he keeps his hands to himself that night while they share a bed. The next morning, Rudeus hears sounds coming from the tower and decides to check it out. He opens the door and finds Lord Sauros getting cozy with one of the servants. The servant runs away when she sees Rudeus, but Lord Sauros doesn't mind. He shows Rudeus a small planet-like object with rings floating in the sky. 2 years have passed since Eris's 10th birthday, and she has reached an advanced level in sword god style. The floating planet is still in the sky, and Rudeus thinks it has grown bigger, but no one knows what it is. On his way out, Rudeus sees Eris excitedly pushing a cart full of ingredients into the kitchen. Rudeus secretly follows them and finds out that Eris is planning to surprise him for his 10th birthday. Rudeus leaves her be and wonders about his family lineage. Only recently he discovered Paul's real name is Paul Notos Greyrat, and the Notos family is one of the 4 head families of Greyrat. The current head of that family is Paul's younger brother. However, there are forces behind the scenes trying to get rid of him. Because Rudeus is from the same lineage, he is under the protection of the Boreas family. It is extremely important that his identity is kept low-key so he won't have a big party like Eris, which is why she feels bad for him. And to make it up to him, she is secretly planning his 10th birthday party. On Rudeus's 10th birthday, he is busy reading a book as usual. Ghislaine keeps him company and praises him for learning 3 languages in just 2 years. Rudeus feels hungry and gets up to leave, but Ghislaine stops him because the others are secretly planning a surprise. Rudeus realizes what is going on and decides to take advantage of the situation by showing Ghislaine her figurine that he created using earth magic. Ghislaine is surprised that he hasn't made her tail, and Rudeus explains that he hasn't seen the base of it so he can't get the details right. He asks her to show him her tail, and without thinking twice, Ghislaine removes her pants to show Rudeus her bottom. Rudeus is impressed by her stone-hard butt muscles and he knocks on them just to make sure they are real. He is called for dinner, and when he arrives, he is welcomed by everybody. Rudeus suddenly starts crying and thanking them for going through the trouble of organizing a party. Lord Sauros is touched, and between sobs he proclaims to declare war against Notos and kill their current leader. But Sauros is soon dragged out of the party for being dramatic. Rudeus thinks his acting was a little too good for him to handle. Eris asks Rudeus to ignore her grandfather and tells him about a surprise she has prepared for him. Rudeus takes a guess and asks if his parents are here, but Eris hesitates and says they couldn't make it because the monsters have been active lately, and Rudeus is upset. Suddenly Eris's mother, Hilda, who hated Rudeus up until now, hugs him and with tears in her eyes declares she will adopt Rudeus, or even better, she will marry him to Eris. Eris is embarrassed and asks Hilda to stop, and she also gets dragged out of the party. Eris finally gives her present to Rudeus. It is a staff she had made by the most skilled craftsman in the city using precious materials from all around the world. It is called the Aqua Hartia. Rudeus thanks her for the gift, and the celebrations begin. After the party is over, Ghislaine carries a sleepy Eris to her room while Rudeus sits with Philip. Philip tells Rudeus that Eris used to have an elder and a younger brother, but they were taken away by Philip's elder brother soon after being born since Philip lost the fight for successorship. He explains the lineage of the Boreas family is raised in the current head's household. Philip says that Hilda had to go through the pain of losing her kids to the head household, which is why she hated Rudeus. He asks Rudeus not to have hard feelings toward her, and Rudeus promises that he doesn't have any. Suddenly Philip gets serious and asks Rudeus if he is interested in marrying Eris and becoming the head of the Boreas family. He even offers to force Eris to marry Rudeus right at that moment if he agrees. But Rudeus doesn't want to be a part of the family drama and he declines and excuses himself. Once in his room, he finds Eris waiting for him. Since it is his birthday, Eris gives him an exclusive opportunity to wiggle his hands on her. Rudeus finds it suspicious and wonders if Philip has anything to do with it, but he realizes it is Eris's idea of making him feel special. But Rudeus loses control and places his hand in the forbidden area, so Eris slaps him and kicks his masculinity. Rudeus can't believe he let his emotions control him and apologizes to Eris. She surprisingly accepts and promises they can try doing the same exercise 5 years later on his 15th birthday. Eris soon leaves and Rudeus is overjoyed. He decides to keep himself from having waifu hentai thoughts until then, but he remembers that he will be going back to Sylphiette when he goes home. Back in Rudeus's village, Paul is furious that he couldn't attend Rudeus's birthday because of high demon activity in their area. After a hard day of fighting off the monsters, he comes back home to his happy family when a strange cloud on the horizon catches his attention. Somewhere in the mountains, a man walks alone. He is attacked by a dragon but doesn't get burnt at all. He stares into the dragon's eyes until he intimidates the creature and it flies off. The man looks worried and says he can feel magic power gathering and wonders what has gone wrong. It's probably the extremely suspicious orb with rings that nobody decided to investigate for 2 years. Lord Perugius recognizes the magic power as the summoning light and worries that someone is trying to release the seal on the demon god Laplace. He orders somebody named Arumanfi of the Bright to find the source of the power and kill anyone who looks suspicious. Meanwhile, Rudeus, Eris, and Ghislaine are out in the open field. Rudeus wants to show them his saint-level magic using his new wand, but as he's about to cast the spell, they get attacked by Arumanfi. Ghislaine defends them and asks for his reason to attack them. He tells them that Lord Perugius sent him to eliminate the root cause of the orb, and Ghislaine clarifies they had nothing to do with the orb. Suddenly, Arumanfi disappears and so does the orb. A bright light strikes the surface and spreads, capturing Ghislaine, Eris, and Rudeus in it. Rudeus wakes up in his body from his past life, but he can't see anything due to the haze. A random man introduces himself to Rudeus and calls himself the Man God. He tells Rudius that he has had his eye on him for quite a while now and knows what a hopeless life he lived before being reincarnated. He assures Rudius that he will not change back to his former self, as this body is just what he looks like in his mind. The figure tries to give him advice, but Rudius is in no mood to listen and thinks he is suspicious. But the figure tells him that his life might depend on it since they are stuck in the demon continent. He explains that Rudius and his friends were caught in a huge mana storm and teleported. Rudius understands the gravity of the situation and agrees to listen to his advice. The man-god tells Rudius that he'll see a man lying near him when he wakes up. Rudius needs to rely on the man and help him, and the figure disappears. Rudius soon wakes up and finds himself lying under the night sky near a bonfire. He is back in his 10-year-old body and sees Eris sleeping nearby. He looks for Ghislaine and finds someone sitting across the fire. He realizes it is a man with green hair and a red gem embedded on his forehead. Rudius freaks out and realizes it is a demon from the supered race, but he relaxes when he sees the man is calm and has no intentions of attacking them. He asks the man what happened. The man tells Rudius that he and Eris fell from the sky, and since the human race is fragile, he made a fire to keep them warm. Rudius thanks him for saving them and asks about Ghislaine, but the man tells him that he only saw the two of them. Rudius introduces himself, and the man tells him his name is Ruijerd Superdia. He also tells Rudius they are in the northeast of the demon continent and promises to help them get back to their continent. Suddenly, Eris wakes up screaming upon seeing the man from supered race and starts crying. After she calms down, Eris is annoyed at her mother for telling her scary stories about the supered race. Ruijerd says it's because some people of his race have brought disgrace to their name. Rudius interrupts and says if they are going to travel together, they should become friends. The next morning, they start their journey at the break of dawn and travel the entire day until they reach a village. Along the way, Ruijerd kills a monster before they could see it. He says that the third eye on his forehead helped him see it before it could attack them. They soon reach the village, and Ruijerd talks to a resident named Rowan to allow them to pass through the village. Rowan refuses, making Ruijerd furious. Rowan agrees to talk to the village chief since he doesn't want to upset someone from the supered race. They wait for a while, but when nobody moves, Rudius asks what is happening. Ruijerd tells them that Rowan belongs to the Migard race, who can talk to each other through telepathy. The village chief soon arrives and is impressed by Rudius's manners. He notices a necklace on Rudius and asks where he got it from. Rudius tells them it is from his master, Roxy. Rowan is in shock and yells out that Roxy is his daughter, and Rudius realizes he is in Roxy's hometown. The chief welcomes them into the village, and as night falls, Eris can hardly keep her eyes open after a long day of traveling. She soon dozes off, and the village chief Ruijerd and Rudius stay up. Chief Keef tells Rudius that Ruijerd is on a mission to get rid of the bad reputation of the supered race. This is why he promised to help Rudius and Eris reach their continent safely. Rudius knows that is a difficult task because children are warned about the supered race. They are taught that they attacked everyone regardless of being enemies or allies during a war. Ruijerd suddenly becomes grim at the story and clarifies that it was a plot by somebody named Laplace. Rudius is scared when he sees Ruijerd angry, but he asks for more information. During the war, Laplace gave the supereds special spears. Rudius remembers that Laplace unified the demons and obtained rights from humans. The supereds fought with him as his subordinates and accepted the honorable spears from him. But suddenly the supereds started attacking everyone around them, regardless if they were enemies or allies. Nobody realized the change, and eventually, they began to kill everyone they could see, even their family members. Ruijerd picks up his spear and says that this spear is his son's soul, who sacrificed his life to save him from the curse. The spears were cursed and the supereds fell for Laplace's trick. This is why Ruijerd has made it his mission to get rid of the curse. Rudius finally gets it and promises to help Ruijerd in his mission. The next day, they are getting ready to leave when Roxy's parents give Rudius a blade as a parting gift. Rudius gives the blade to Eris, who is delighted to finally have a weapon she can fight with. Eris is already putting her sword to use by killing all the monsters, and that night, they eat her catch of the day. They continue traveling and soon reach a cliff that will take them to the town of Rikarisu, but the gate that leads to the town is heavily guarded, and passing them with Ruijerd will not be easy. While thinking of a plan to get through the security without any hassle, Rudius spots a blue stone that leaves color and uses it to color Ruijerd's green hair to blue. The guards do not suspect them and let them pass. The three are overwhelmed by the town and decide to earn money while they're there. After changing their appearances, they walk into a club where the Adventure Guild gathers. Rudius wants to see if their disguises work, so he says that Ruijerd is a super devil and sings about his strength. But the demons laugh at them because they know that superds have green hair. Rudius registers his team as Dead End, which is also Ruijerd's nickname. This is their first step to erase the bad impression created about superds. They stay in a hotel for the night, and Eris almost beats up another guild member to death for accidentally breaking the button of her cape that Rudeus bought for her. Rudius apologizes on Iris's behalf because she doesn't understand demon language, and he helps them heal using his healing magic. That night, Rudius falls asleep, and he is again visited by the suspicious figure that calls himself the Man God. Rudius says he sucks, and the man advises him to accept the Lost Kitty quest and see where he's taken from there. Rudius wakes up and finds Eris awake, staring outside the window. He sits by her side and assures her that they will go home soon. The next day they start looking for the kitten, and they reach a cave where they find the demon kitten as big as a regular-sized panther. There are also other animals kept in a cage. They hear someone coming and hide in the shadows. 3 demons come and threaten the pets, but Rudeus, Eris and Ruijerd attack them. Rudius uses his earth magic and restrains them to the wall. Rudius approaches one of them and asks why they have captured all the pets, but the man headbutts him and sends him flying. Ruijerd is angry and decapitates the man in one strike. Rudius can't believe it, and Ruijerd doesn't see anything wrong with what he did. Rudius thinks it will be impossible for the superds to regain their reputation if Ruijerd continues acting like this. He asks Ruijerd never to kill again because no matter what the other person does, killing them for it is wrong. Rudeus then turns to the frightened adventurers and asks them their purpose for stealing the pets. They admit that they do it so that when a request is made, they just return the pets and earn money. Rudeus asks them to work for their team, but Ruijerd loses his cool and refuses to let the villains into their team. Eris suddenly punches Ruijerd to leave Rudeus alone. She yells at him that Rudeus is doing this for their own good. Ruijerd finally calms down as he still has a promise to fulfill. The group returns the pets, and the pet thieves go to the guild to raise their party rank from D to C as Rudeus asked them to. Rudeus tells them to accept rank B quests, and his team will accept F rank quests. He says they will exchange the quests and take the reward money since Rudeus's team has just registered and can't accept quests beyond F rank. He also asks the other team to spread good things about Dead End. Meanwhile, Roxy is traveling to the Mana Calamity area to find out if Rudeus is okay. A huge billboard is placed for the townspeople to put up letters informing their loved ones of their situation. She comes across a letter from Paul to Rudeus stating that Zenith, Lilia and Aisha are missing after the calamity hit them. Norn is with Paul under his protection, and he believes that Rudeus is capable of finding his way back, so Paul has postponed his search for him. He further writes that he is going to the Milis continent where Zenith was born. He also plans to visit Lilia's hometown to leave a message for her with her parents. He asks Rudeus to search for them in the central continent, and if he finds them, he must write back to Paul at the given address. Meanwhile, Rudeus, Eris, and Ruijerd are on another quest to find a monster in the petrified forest. They find 2 other teams already fighting over the quest. They ultimately agree on a first-come, first-served basis and hurry to find the monster before the other 2 teams can. But Ruijerd stops Rudeus and Eris and asks them to follow the team with young kids, because he is worried about their safety. They follow the other team, and soon the other team is surrounded by monsters. Ruijerd and Eris are ready to jump in, but Rudeus stops them, thinking that if they let the situation worsen a bit more before jumping in, they might be able to create a good name for themselves. He is busy in his thoughts when one of the other team members gets brutally killed by the monster. Rudeus freezes, but Ruijerd and Eris jump into action and kill the 2 monsters. Ruijerd is furious at Rudeus's poor judgment about the situation that cost somebody's life, but the other team's leader, Kurt, stops Ruijerd from hurting Rudeus and takes responsibility for his fallen teammate. He says he underestimated the danger and endangered his team's life, but they are adventurers, and they know they can lose their lives at any time during a mission. He then cries his heart out while Ruijerd sits by his side. Kurt and his teammate carry the remains of their dead teammate back and bid farewell to Rudeus, Eris, and Ruijerd. Rudeus's team has no choice but to continue the pursuit, and they soon come face to face with a red hood cobra. They decide that this is the mysterious monster they are looking for. They see the 3rd team in trouble and jump into action immediately. Under Ruijerd's guidance, they are able to defeat the red hood cobra, but they realize that they weren't able to save the members of the 3rd team. They bring back the remains of the red hood cobra to give it to Jalil. But another adventurer finds out about their secret exchange and tries to blackmail money from Rudius. Rudius thinks if he sticks to non-violence he could avoid trouble, but there is no getting out of this trouble since the information could cancel them and lose their adventurer ID. Rudius is about to use his magic to delete the blackmailer from existence when suddenly, Rudius pours water on himself and reveals that he is a superd. He then grabs the blackmailer by his neck and warns him to stay quiet, or else he will find him and kill him. The blackmailer pees his pants and passes out, and Rudius runs off into the mountains surrounding the town. Rudius tries to stop him, but Rudius is gone in seconds. Kurt is also scared, but Rudius reminds him that Rudius saved his life and he shouldn't be afraid. Rudius is disappointed at how people are behaving after Rudius' identity is revealed. They leave the town and reunite with Rudius outside the city. Rudius apologizes for being naive. Rudius also apologizes for overlooking Rudius' efforts. He knows Rudius is desperate to protect Eris, and that makes him a warrior, according to Rudius. Rudius says that he will protect Rudius and Eris regardless of restoring the good name of his race. Rudius thanks Rudius for understanding but says that he will do whatever it takes to clear Superd's name, and they laugh at each other's stubbornness. Rudius is happy that he has been acknowledged by Rudius. He thinks a mutual bond of trust has been formed that day, and it will last for a very long time. The next morning, Rudius is shocked to see Rudius bald. He shaved off his hair so they don't get into trouble again. Rudius also gives Rudius a headband to cover his third eye so people don't find it suspicious. Rudius realizes he has been trying to do everything all by himself. This time, he decides to discuss it with his teammates and work on things together. Team Dead End is officially on a new mission to their next destination, the Asura Kingdom.
After days of travel, the salty breeze welcomes Rudius, Eris, and Rudius to the Asura Kingdom. Eris is extremely excited to see the ocean for the first time, and gets ready to jump into the water, but Rudius stops her since there are monsters in the sea. At the same time, Roxy travels with two new allies. She steps foot in the Asura Kingdom, and just misses Rudius as the two groups have their backs toward each other. Nobody there knows Rudius' real name, since he has been using Rudius' name, and they named their team Dead End. They can't afford to pay for a boat, and after having dinner, they rest for the night. Rudius goes to bed, and thinks about different ways they can make it back home. As soon as he is asleep, he meets the man-god. The man-god welcomes him, and Rudius is suspicious since he hasn't heard from him in a year. The man-god advises Rudius to buy as much food as he can from a street shop, and walk into a back alley. The next morning, Rudius wakes up early and decides to follow the man-god's instructions, and buys a large amount of food. Rudius is on his way back home when he hears someone asking for food from strangers, so he offers her the food. Once she's full, she removes her cloak and dramatically introduces herself as Kishirika Kishirasu, the Great Demon Emperor. Rudius feels bad for the girl and thinks she has been playing all by herself. So he decides to play along and addresses her as Your Majesty. This makes Kishirika very happy, since this isn't the kind of reaction she usually gets when she introduces herself. Since he helped her, she grants Rudius one wish, and Rudius asks for money. But Kishirika is broke herself, so Rudius asks for half of the world. Kishirika says she doesn't have that either, and lets Rudius make another wish. Rudius then asks for the only thing he can think of, which is her body. Kishirika agrees, and as she is about to remove her pants, she remembers she has a fiancé and refuses Rudius's wish. Rudius sits down and doesn't think she can actually give him anything. But Kishirika thinks of something and asks Rudius to look at her. She pulls out his right eye and gives him a demon eye in its place. Rudius screams in pain, but when he opens his eye, he can see many outlines of Kishirika. Kishirika soon leaves, and Rudius realizes that this is the legendary Eye of Foresight. Rudius begins to walk back to his team, but he bumps into a man, and the man thinks he wants to fight. But Rudius sees a pot falling with his new eye, and pushes him away seconds before it falls where he was standing. Rudius returns to his team, and he tells Eris and Rudius about what happened. Rudius is surprised to hear that Kishirika has revived. He explains that she has 12 demon eyes, and can see through all her eyes. Rudius stays inside for a week to get used to his new eye. After a week, Rudius thinks he has adjusted to his new vision. He fights Eris to try out his new powers, and he is surprisingly able to defeat her very quickly. Eris angrily stomps away, and Rudius praises Rudius for learning to control the eye within a week. He says it is very impressive, since he has seen people with demon eyes in the Super Warrior group, but they all failed to control it until they died. Rudius is filled with confidence and challenges Rudyard, but he ends up getting destroyed. Eris is still sulking over losing the fight, because she wants to get as strong as Rudius. That night, Rudius can't sleep because he feels guilty for using the power he got from someone else to beat Eris. He knows she has been working extra hard to get stronger. He thinks he should be focusing on bringing Eris back home, and sneaks out at night, but Rudyard catches him and asks what he is doing out so late. Rudius doesn't want to tell him, but he gives in and tells Rudyard. He was planning to sell the staff that Eris gifted him to get them enough money to pay for a boat. Rudyard tells him that Eris would be salty if she found out that he had sold the staff. So he asks Rudius to find another way, and says he is ready to overlook any evil until they cross the sea. Just then, Rudyard catches a glimpse of someone lurking in the shadows, and asks him to show himself. The man Rudius saved earlier appears from the shadows, and introduces himself as Garrus Cleaner. In another area of Azura, Roxy and her teammates, Elinalize and Talhand, are at a bar looking for Rudius's family. Elinalize is flirting with the men, and Roxy is asked to join a newbie group of adventurers. She declines, and tells them she is an A-rank water mage. They are shocked, and realize that she is the Midget King-class water mage, Roxy Magurdia. That night, Roxy tells her team about a ferocious demon named Dead End. She also tells them that a group with the same name suddenly got famous on the Demon Continent after the Mana disaster. Talhand says he has also heard about the 3-member party who have recently arrived in the Azura Kingdom. But he says they can't be bad, because the rumors about them are good. Roxy feels that it is unlikely they are Superts, but she asks her team members to stay away from them anyways. The next day, Roxy is at the beach trying to find information about Paul's family. She sees Eris and Rudyard practicing sword fighting, and looks at them from behind the rocks. Rudyard notices her, and she freaks out and runs away, realizing he is a Superd. She arrives back at their hotel, and finds Elinalize getting railed by 5 demon men. The shock is enough to send Roxy into battle mode, and she ends up sending the demon men flying out of the hotel wall by attacking them with ice magic. Roxy pays for the damage, and blames Elinalize for their loss, but Elinalize doesn't regret the little orgy she had. The team then leaves the kingdom in search of Paul's missing family. At night, Dead End is sailing in Garrus's boat. He agreed to carry Rudyard across the sea to the Xanto port. In exchange, they have to help Garrus set free some smuggled goods. The journey isn't smooth, and they have to fight sea serpents, giant octopuses, pirates, and ghost ships. Their ship sinks, and Eris and Rudius somehow reach an isolated island and begin to repopulate it. But this is just one of Rudius's perverted fantasies, and he is actually on the ship with a seasick Eris. They reach land, and Rudius leaves Eris in a house, and asks her to wait while he goes to pick up Rudyard from the smugglers. Rudius enters the dungeon and looks for Rudyard, but he can't help but notice the smugglers beating a beast child. Rudius shuts his eyes, and keeps walking until he reaches Rudyard's chamber. Rudyard tells Rudius he is going to eliminate them for hurting the beast children. Rudius agrees, and lets Rudyard take care of the guards, while he rescues the children, and they all make it out of the dungeon. One of the children reminds them that there is a giant dog that was also imprisoned, and Rudius volunteers to go back to get it. Rudius reaches the dungeon and finds the dog's cage, but a barrier keeps it from getting up. Rudius breaks the crystal above it, and the barrier disappears. The dog shakes itself, and jumps on Rudius to show him its gratitude. Rudius starts petting the dog, but their cuddling is interrupted by a beast man named Guise. He attacks Rudius with ultrasonic waves and paralyzes Rudius. Rudius realizes he is in trouble, since Guise is not alone, and he thinks Rudius is one of the smugglers because of his creepy face. The dog turns out to be their sacred beast, and they have come to rescue the beast children. Rudius is carried away by Guise back to their village, and he warns Rudius that he will be punished for his crimes. He doesn't realize that this is all a big misunderstanding, but Rudius is paralyzed from head to toe and doesn't want them to think he is a criminal. In a forest, Rudius says he has great perks living in a rent-free apartment. He has bed bugs, a hole for a toilet, and free meals that include the meat of an unknown creature. He says he has great security and there's only one way in and out. He has been living naked in a prison cell made of sturdy branches in the Beast Village, and he is worried that this will give him a new fetish. After 5 days, a man named Geese is thrown into Rudius's cell. Rudius takes him in as his subordinate and makes him massage his back. Rudius feels his patience running out and is worried that no one is looking for him. He says he could just burn the forest down, and he suddenly feels the temperature rising. Geese asks if he's doing it, but they realize the forest is on fire. Rudius creates a key using earth magic and they escape the burning cell. Rudius and Geese run towards the village and see the beast people being killed by humans and the beast kids being kidnapped. Even if the people of the village mistreated Rudius and didn't let him explain himself, seeing them suffer is too much for him to take. Rudius changes the weather to rain and extinguishes the fire. Geese fights off the intruders, but the rain catches their attention. They attack Rudius immediately, but Geis suddenly appears and thanks Rudius for his help. He realizes that it was their prisoner who helped them, and says he'll deal with it later, and asks Rudius to help him retrieve the kidnapped children. Rudius helps take down the intruders, but Garrus emerges from the shadows. He has a beast child as a hostage and tells Rudius that he used him and his team as bait to distract the beast people and kidnap the beast children. Garrus attacks Geis with his blade and injures him. Geese realizes Garrus is a North-style sword god, and is also known as the North Saint Garrus the Cleaner. Garrus challenges Rudius, but Rudius doesn't think he can't bring himself to risk his life for a child. But when he hears the child's cries, he decides he has to fight. Before he can act, the sacred beast dog comes out of nowhere and charges at Garrus. Rudius takes the opportunity and attacks him, officially accepting his challenge. The sacred beast dog bites his sword and jumps away. Geese then throws dirt in Garrus's eyes, and while he is distracted, Rudius releases the power of the sun on Garrus and defeats him. But Rudius immediately passes out. When he opens his eyes, he finds the sacred beast dog licking his face. He is more surprised to see Eris and Rudyard standing before him. Rudyard explains he is at Gustav's house, leader of the Deldodia beast people. Geis and the beast guard apologize to Rudius for the misunderstanding and ask him to punish them for how they treated him. Gustav thanks Rudius for all he has done for them. Rudius wants to know what took Eris and Rudyard so long to rescue him. And Eris tells him that they met Gustav and almost got into a fight with their warrior group after a misunderstanding. After clearing it up, they defeated the smugglers. But then got into trouble with the officials at Xanto Port, who also mistook them to be the smugglers. They somehow got out of the mess, and Eris was responsible for keeping the beast children safe. Eris is happy and can't wait to get back home to tell her grandfather about their adventure. Meanwhile at Eris's home, Lord Sorrow's Grey Rat is under trial for failing to take proper measures when the mana disaster happened. He is removed from his position and ordered to be executed immediately. Sorrows takes responsibility, and in his last moments, he thinks of Eris and wishes for her to live a happy life before he is beheaded. It is pouring in the village, and Eris is playing with Geis's daughter Tana and her cousin Senna. Rudius doesn't want to miss his chance and hides in a wooden box to spy on the girls. But his pleasure-seeking session is interrupted by the sacred beast dog and Geis. Geis tells him he will not tolerate Rudius's filthy thoughts about his daughter. Rudius, Eris, and Rudyard are living with the beast people and have adapted to their culture. After having dinner, Geis notices a ring on Eris's finger and asks about it. He says it belongs to the beast tribe. Eris suddenly remembers Ghislaine is also from the Doldia tribe and tells him that she gave it to her on her 10th birthday. The mood gets very serious and Geis says Ghislaine broke their trust. She gave up protecting their tribe and the sacred beast and left the village. He adds that Ghislaine is the shame of their tribe and grabs his daughter to leave immediately. Eris runs after them and yells that Ghislaine is her master, and she won't accept him saying such things about her master. She cries and tells him how much she respects Ghislaine because she taught her swordsmanship. Rudius joins her and says he too respects Ghislaine. Guys can't believe they are talking about the same person. The next day, Tana and Sarah meet with Eris to hear more about Ghislaine. Tana tells her Ghislaine is Geis's sister, but has only heard bad things about her. Tana asks Eris if she will teach her how to use a sword, but Sarah asks her not to since Geis would get angry. But Eris agrees. They don't realize that Geis has been listening to their conversation this whole time. Geis is proud seeing his daughter practice sword fighting. He stands next to Rudius and watches his daughters practice. He asks Rudius if Ghislaine really is Eris's master. Rudius tells Geis it is true, and she has become sword god. Rudius also says Ghislaine is his apprentice in magic in school. Geis laughs, and thinks Rudius is joking, but he realizes that Rudius is serious. He is surprised at Ghislaine's transformation, and Rudius tells him that people can change. After 3 months, Tana has improved her swordsmanship. The rainy season will soon come to an end, and it will be time for them to leave. The thought of Eris leaving makes Tana and Sarah sad. Suddenly, Tana gets angry and starts fighting with Eris. Sarah runs to call Rudius for help, and they separate the two. Rudius notices that Eris has learned to hold back her anger and is proud of her. Later that night, Gaius comes to his daughter's room and tells her that Eris and her team are leaving the next day. He tells her about Ghislaine and how stubborn she was, and how she would hit and hurt people when she was in a bad mood. She left the village with a traveling swordsman, and Gaius was glad because he didn't have to deal with his sister anymore. He now regrets not saving her at the time when she needed him the most. He knows Ghislaine will probably never return to the village, and he doesn't want Tana to make the same mistake and regret it later. Tana doesn't want to part ways on a bad knot, so she takes Sarah to meet Eris. Rudius hears the girls outside their room, and he decides to go out with the sacred beast to give them a space to talk. Tana apologizes for being selfish, and the 3 girls rekindle their friendship. The next day, the team is ready to leave. Gustav thanks them for helping the village during tough times and saving their children. He says he wants to hear Rudyard's story some other time and invites Rudius to visit their village again. Meanwhile, Eris, Tana, and Sarah cry as they say goodbye. Gaius steps in and challenges Eris to a fight since he wants to see Ghislaine's swordsmanship through Eris. Eris accepts the challenge and thinks it is an opportunity to improve Ghislaine's reputation. They start the fight, but it ends in just 1 strike, and Gaius appreciates Ghislaine's talent. Everybody cheers except for Rudius, who doesn't understand what just happened, but he keeps it to himself. They leave the village, and Geese surprisingly comes running after them. He gets in their cart and tells them he escaped the prison and would like to travel with them since he is also going to Millis. On their journey, they come across a stone with inscriptions on it. Geese tells them it is a monument showing the 7 strongest warriors in the world. They are the Technique God, Dragon God, Fighting God, Demon God, Death God, Sword God, and lastly, the North God. Rudius looks at the monument, decides to never get involved with any of them and live a humble life. After days of traveling, the group reaches Millishan, the capital of the Holy Millis Kingdom. Geese decides it is time to part ways, and before leaving, he tells them to visit the Adventure Guild in the town. He says that Rudius will meet someone interesting there. They rest for the night in a hotel and discuss what they will do from here. Rudius suggests that they take up quests to earn money in the town before heading to their next destination. He also says he has a strategy to clear the supered race's name at the same time. Every time they help someone, they will reveal Rudyard's identity and give them a stone doll of him. They take the next day off so Rudius can make more dolls and write a letter to his family to tell them he is doing fine. The next day, Rudius is sitting by the window and wonders what to write since it is his first time writing a letter to Paul. But he gets distracted by men kidnapping a person. Rudius is annoyed, but he immediately rushes out to save the kid. He follows the men into an abandoned church and waits to see how strong the enemy is while his hand touches a familiar piece of clothing. It is underwear, and he can't contain his excitement. The noise gives away his presence, and the men ask him to show himself. Rudius comes out wearing the pair of underpants on his head and introduces himself as Rudyard. He takes down 3 men and is about to rescue the kid when reinforcements arrive, and they attack him. One of the women recognizes her underpants, and Rudius takes a big sniff. Rudius fights off his opponents and they call their captain. The captain shows up, but he is very drunk. He attacks Rudius and thinks that he fights like him, and something about Rudius feels oddly familiar. The captain tears the underpants off Rudius's face and he suddenly stops. He calls him Rudy, and Rudius realizes that only one person on the planet calls him by that name, his dad, Paul. Rudius sits with his dad in a bar and tells him about his adventures for the past 1.5 years. But instead of feeling happy that his son is fine, Paul is angry and accuses Rudius of having fun instead of searching for his family. He can't believe he didn't care to write a letter to his family or ask how they were doing. Paul also accuses Rudius of enjoying adventuring with cute girl like Eris. This rubs Rudius the wrong way, and he brings up Paul's history with women and how he might be cheating on his mother again. Paul has had enough, and he punches Rudius, which breaks into a fight between the two. Rudius dodges Paul's attacks, and using his beast eye, He manages to pin down Paul and land several punches on him. But suddenly a little girl runs in to save her dad, Rudius' sister. She doesn't recognize Rudius and doesn't want to hear him. Rudius decides he hates his dad, and he gets up to leave. He plans to leave the city as soon as possible, but his dad's voice from behind stops him. His dad tells him that while he was enjoying his adventure, they formed a search group for all of the people who were teleported in the disaster. He says that many people were taken as slaves and they are trying to rescue them, which Rudius mistook as kidnapping. Rudius realizes how naive he had been all this time because he didn't think his home was affected by the disaster. He suddenly asks about Sylphiette, but this hurts Paul. He asks if Rudius has forgotten about his mother. Paul thought that Rudius must have become an adventurer, so he had left a letter for him to see on the quest board at Xanto Port. He had expected that Rudius must have started searching for his family, and he is very disappointed in his son. Rudius looks around and sees eyes staring at him, reminding him of his previous life. Rudius comes back to the hotel and thinks about talking with Paul tomorrow. He suddenly feels sick and throws up. Later that evening, Eris and Rudyard return, and they find Rudius sitting in the dark. Rudius tells Eris that he met his dad, and Eris is ready to fight Paul because of how upset he made Rudius. But Rudyard stops her and asks her not to meddle in a family matter. Eris fidgets and she suddenly hugs Rudius and says they will always be by his side, which makes Rudius feel much better. Paul finds himself in the middle of the field with little Norn in his arms. He remembers looking out the window at the approaching storm before finding himself in an unknown place. But seeing Norn's innocent face, Paul gets himself together and assures Norn not to worry. After spending many difficult days traveling with Norn and trying to keep her safe, they finally reach the rescue camps at Millis, where a priest offers them a place in a rundown church. Paul creates a rescue team with a handful of people, and it grows as many people volunteer to search for the missing families. For Norn, her dad became her hero, who helped the missing reunite with their family. However, Paul wasn't able to find his own family, and he turned to alcohol. In the present, Paul is drowning himself in alcohol after his encounter with Rudius the day before. Geese walks into the bar and sits at the same table as Paul and asks him what happened. Paul tells him that he met with Rudius, and Geese calls him out for expecting too much from an 11-year-old. He tells Paul about the hardships he had to face in the Demon Continent since Paul has never been there. He also says that Rudius had to handle many things all at once, and he didn't have it easy either. Geese said that Rudius acted happy because he didn't want to worry Paul. Geese tells Paul that he has become a drunk scum who can't accept that he met his son who is doing better than he is. Geese leaves him with food for thought, and Paul is angry at himself for behaving the way he did with Rudius. Paul sobers up, and he finally accepts that he is glad to see Rudius happy and healthy. The next morning, Rudius, Eris, and Rudyard are having breakfast when Paul shows up at the hotel. Eris loses her cool and yells at Paul for making Rudius suffer, but Rudyard grabs her and takes her outside. He also advises Paul that he needs to be grateful that his son is alive. Paul is surprised to see a Superd with such self-control and wisdom. Paul heeds his advice and apologizes to Rudius for yesterday, but Rudius says Paul has nothing to apologize for and that he should be more serious about the situation they are in. He also apologizes for not finding the letter Paul wrote. Paul asks him not to worry about it and asks where he will go next. Rudius tells him that he has promised to take Eris home safely, so they will head to the Fittoa region. The owner of the cafe notices their interaction and decides to help them open up a little more. He brings drinks on the house and asks Rudius to look at his father's face. Rudius looks at Paul, and he is suddenly reminded of a memory from his previous life. He was playing a game with a classmate who said he was envious of Rudius because of how carefree his life was. This triggered Rudius, and he attacked his friend because he was depressed, and his friend made it sound like he had a wonderful life. He was angry at his friend for laughing in such a carefree manner. When he calmed down, he realized he had gone overboard with his friend, who was only trying to cheer him up in his own way. Rudius thought he would apologize to his friend when he came again, but that friend never showed up. But Paul went out of his way to come and apologize to Rudius. Rudius decides to make it right. He asks Paul to forget what happened the day before and pretend they're meeting for the first time after a long time. He asks Paul to spread his arms and then jumps into his arms, hugging him the way he should have when he met him. Paul hugs his son and tells him how much he missed him. He cries and says how glad he is to find his son, He was all alone and thought everybody died in the disaster. They head back to Rudius's hotel to wait for Eris and Rudyard. When they show up, Rudius is shocked to see that Eris has a black eye, and Rudyard explains he had to resort to force to calm her down. Rudius heals her and informs them that there has been a change of plan. They will be heading to the central continent immediately since his dad has given him travel money and introduction letters to help them travel. Rudius then tells Eris that nothing is left of their hometown, and it is a possibility that Philip and Sorrows are dead, and Ghislaine is missing too. But Eris says she has been prepared for this. The next day, they say their goodbyes and Rudius promises to meet Norn someday. Guy shows up to say goodbye to Paul. Paul asks where he is headed and Guy says he is going to search another region. Paul realizes that Guy was helping him find his family this whole time, and he was behind reuniting him with Rudius. Paul asks his assistants to get a meeting together for him. He won't lose hope and will continue looking for his family no matter what. Rudius, Eris, and Rudyard start their journey to the central continent in a ship. Eris isn't happy about it, as she is throwing up buckets again. She asks Rudius to heal her, but Rudius is also throwing up buckets. He is amazed at how Rudyard is keeping it together. Looking at the horizon, Rudius thinks about Zenith, Lilia, Aisha, and Sylphiette, and hopes they are doing fine, wherever they are. He considers traveling through the King Dragon Kingdom, where they'll arrive in the Chiron Kingdom, and he thinks can finally see Roxy after all these years, but he thinks something is off. He isn't sure if it is the excitement, or the rocking boat that suddenly makes him giddy, and throws up. Meanwhile, Roxy is at a bar, sitting with an adventurer named Nokapura, who tells her that another adventurer, Blaze, died while fighting Red Hood Cobra. Roxy remembers Blaze's team of adventurers, and how they would guide her when she was little. Nokapura can't help but notice how much Roxy has grown. Roxy asks if Nokapura still takes money from the weak, but she is surprised to learn that he stopped after his encounter with Team Dead End 2 years ago. Suddenly, all blood drains from Roxy's face, and she looks pale as a ghost upon hearing the name. She had come face to face with Rudyard, and the misinformation about Supports had clouded her judgment, making her run for her life. She shudders upon thinking of Rudyard. Nokapura changes the topic and asks if she visited her parents. This takes Roxy's mind off the Support, and she tells him she hasn't visited her hometown yet, but she isn't sure she is even welcome there. Nokapura is amazed, and tries to make her understand that even though she doesn't possess the gift of telepathy, it doesn't mean that she will be shunned from her hometown. Roxy decides to heed Nokapura's advice, and visits the King Dragon Kingdom. She is still hesitant, and hates that the village is so quiet. She goes to the playground, where she used to play as a kid, and sees a kid get hurt. She uses her healing magic, and the children try to thank her and communicate with her through telepathy, but all she hears is little clicks, giving her PTSD, and running away from there. Roxy realizes she ran to her home, and decides to enter her house. Her parents are delighted to see Roxy, but her father maintains his distance, as he doesn't know how to act in front of her, as he's seeing her after so long. But the happiness is clearly visible on her parents' faces. Roxy remains distant, and lets them know she's leaving. Her mother tries to stop her, but she remains indifferent, thinking nobody wants her there. But when her mother can't stop herself from crying about all the years they've spent alone, Roxy realizes she was wrong. When she first came to know she didn't possess telepathy, she thought her parents had to suffer because of her, and so if she left, they would be happy. But little did she know, it was all in her head, and her parents had never wanted their daughter to leave. Suddenly, Roxy finds her eyes tearing up, and the years of emotion she had bottled up inside her come gushing out in the form of tears. She hugs her mom and cries, apologizing for leaving so suddenly. Her dad joins in, and Roxy realizes that she was missing the big pictures. The next day, Roxy wakes up to the pleasant aroma of a home-cooked meal. After having food, her parents ask if she is leaving, and Roxy apologizes. She says she has to, because her student is missing, and she has to find him. Roxy's dad is suddenly reminded of Rudius, who visited them 2 years ago, and tells Roxy about him. He also adds that Rudius was traveling with Eris and Rudyard, who is a Support. Roxy almost passes out from shock, but Roxy's dad tells her he is unlike any other Support they've met. Roxy is ready to leave, and promises her parents she'll be back soon. She's returning to her hotel, thinking how amazing Rudius has become, since he has teamed up with a Support. As soon as she arrives at her hotel, she finds Alynalise indulging in her usual orgy parties, which makes Roxy mad, and she attacks all the demon men with her icicle magic. She ends up paying for the damage from her pocket and requests Alynalise to stop causing trouble for her. Roxy is back with her team, and they head toward the northwest of the demon continent to find Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha. Her quest to find Rudius is over, now that she knows he is doing fine. She's sure she'll meet him again somewhere. Rudius meets the man god again after a year, which makes him even more irritated, since he doesn't want to depend on him for his advice, but he has no choice, because his pieces of advice have helped him in the past. When he meets man god in the dream world, he reverts to his old self, which he hates. This time he is upfront with man god, and asks for the whereabouts of his family. The man god asks Rudius to promise that he will start believing in him if his advice leads to Rudius reuniting with his missing family members. Rudius doesn't promise right away, but says he'll think about it, depending on the outcome of his advice, which is fine by man god. He then shows Rudius a vision with Aisha in it, and tells Rudius he will come across this scenario, but he is not allowed to disclose his identity to her. The man god asks him to use a fake name and investigate what is going on. He then instructs Rudius to write a letter to someone he knows in the palace of Chiron Kingdom. If he does that, he will be able to rescue Aisha and Lilia from the palace. Rudius finds himself on the boat feeling sick and throws up for the 100th time. They finally arrive on the central continent, and breathing the fresh breeze energizes them instantly. They enter the gates of the capital of Chiron Kingdom and are immediately mesmerized by the elephants. But Rudius stays focused and decides to write the letter to Roxy as instructed by the man god, and asks for Eris's and Rudyard's help in gathering information about Lilia and Aisha. After they rent out a room at a hotel, Rudius writes a letter to Roxy, updating her on the situation, and hands the letter to someone to deliver it to the palace. He walks down the street, but finds himself being followed, so he runs into an alley and creates a wall between the stalker and himself, but soon realizes the alley is the same place he saw in his dream, and after hearing some commotion, he makes the wall disappear and finds Aisha struggling to get the letter from the royal guards. Aisha snatches the letter from them and runs to hide behind Rudius, but before the guards can chase her, Rudius uses earth magic and melts the earth, restricting their movements. The guards immediately alert the other guards, and finding himself surrounded, Rudius asks Aisha to hold onto him tight. He then creates a huge pillar where they are standing, and he hurls them into the air, while the guards stand there dumbfounded. Once out of the guards' reach, Aisha introduces herself and asks Rudius's name. Rudius is suddenly reminded of Man God's advice and introduces himself as Shadow Moon Knight. He even makes a weird pose that only embarrasses him, but Aisha is not judgmental and thanks him for saving her from a difficult situation. Aisha asks for another favor from Rudius and tells him that she needs to send a letter she's carrying to her dad and tell him that her mother is being held captive in the castle. Rudius tries to drop a hint about her taking the help of an elder sibling, but Aisha outrightly rejects it. She tells him that she has an elder brother, but he is not dependable because she discovered his twisted fantasies after secretly opening the box her brother cherished. It had the panties of a 14-year-old, and after hearing stories about him from her mother, she confirmed that her brother was a pervert. The word echoes in Rudius's ears, and he understands why Man God asked him not to reveal his true name to her. Almost drowning in sweat, he doesn't disclose anything, except that he is known as the pet owner of Dead End, when Aisha asks for his real name. Aisha looks at him with awe, and Rudius can't help himself from promising that he will rescue her mom from the castle. He brings Aisha back to the hotel, and while she sleeps, Rudius explains the situation to Eris and Rudyard. He also asks them to address him as pet owner in front of Aisha. They agree, and Eris proposes they immediately leave to raid the palace, but Rudius stops them and explains they need to wait for his master's reply before they do anything. The next morning, Rudius is woken up early by a guard named Ginger from the palace. Rudius is worried she is there for Aisha, but when Ginger mentions Roxy has sent her, Rudius immediately gets ready and asks Eris and Rudyard to take care of Aisha while he's gone, and promises to introduce them to Roxy after he returns. Rudius excitedly follows Ginger, and even gets complimented by her when she calls him a genius, as Roxy has told them all about him. Rudius grins, and is happy Roxy keeps him in such high regard. They reach a door, with the guards he met yesterday guarding the door. Ginger hesitates a bit before sending him in. Rudius senses something is wrong, and as he had anticipated, Roxy is nowhere to be seen. Instead, the prince who can give Rudius a competition in being a bigger pervert welcomes him suspiciously. Rudius immediately recognizes him, as Roxy had mentioned him in her letters. He also sees Lilia lying nearby, tied with ropes. Suddenly, on the prince's command, the guards pull a trap door open from under Rudius's feet. Rudius slips into an underground dungeon, and there is a king-ranked magic barrier. The prince says it was originally created to capture Roxy, and Rudius cannot use his magic inside the barrier. The prince finally introduces himself as Pax Chiron, the 7th prince of Chiron. He plans to use Rudius as bait to lure Roxy, and trap her to become Pax's slave, and make her give birth to 5 heirs. Rudius realizes Pax is not as bright as he claims to be, and tries to trick him into asking how he plans to bring Roxy there, unless he lets Rudius and Lilia plead for help. But Pax believes Roxy is smart, and will figure out that her disciple is trapped on her own. He is more concerned about fulfilling his fantasy than anything else, and not willing to hear anything more, he shuts the trap door. Pax then assaults Ginger for failing to find Aisha, and threatens to harm her and the guards' families, before sending them off to search for Aisha. Meanwhile, Rudius thinks that the man-god might have tricked him. In a flashback before the Mana Calamity, Paul and his family were staring out of the window at the approaching cloud, when suddenly a bright light emerged from the sky. Lilia noticed the light spreading, and ran to hug Aisha just before the calamity hit, and they were transported to the bottom of a lake. Lilia quickly swam up, clutching onto an unconscious Aisha. Lilia desperately called out to Aisha, and after coughing up lots of water, Aisha finally woke up. Lilia walked for days carrying Aisha, and finally made it to Chiron Kingdom. Lilia was confused as to how she got there, but determined to find help, she went to the palace, as she had heard Roxy was in the palace working as a tutor for Prince Pax. Pax, however, had other plans for them, and immediately imprisoned them to lure Roxy, as she had run away after being disgusted by Pax's strange fetish with her. In the present, Rudius is still imprisoned at the palace, when the 3rd prince of Chiron, Zenoba Chiron, visits him. He has questions about Rudyard's figurine that Rudius was carrying in his luggage, and asks Rudius where he got it. Rudius doesn't want to take a chance by disclosing that he is the creator, so he says he bought it from a shop in Demon Continent. Zenoba then unwraps Roxy's figurine, and Rudius is surprised to see that it ended up in the palace, after he had sold it many years back. Zenoba tells Rudius that Pax bought the figurine 4 years ago to satisfy his kinkiness, but it had attracted Zenoba's attention, and since then, he has been obsessed with the fine details of the figurine, that left much room for imagination. But Rudius discovers the mold he had made on her disappeared, and explains the reason why it was there in the first place. Zenoba feels he'll die of guilt, because he ruined the figurine by removing the mole. Zenoba realizes Rudius is the creator, and calls him master. He can hardly control his tears, because he can't kiss Rudius's feet with the barrier separating the two. Rudius is repulsed by Zenoba's excitement and yelling. Meanwhile, Eris and Rudyard are concerned, because Rudius hasn't contacted them yet. Just as they plan to do something about it, 2 palace guards visit them and take them to the palace. They request for them to save their families that are being held hostage by Pax. They tell the truth and explain what happened to Rudius. Eris is willing to leave immediately to save their families, but Rudyard stops her and asks her to take care of Aisha while he saves the guards' families. Aisha agrees, but when she sees the commotion and Zenoba dragging Pax by his head, she immediately leaves and finds dungeon where Rudius is being held captive. Ginger and the guards are trying to talk Zenoba out of hurting Pax, while Pax continues yelling and asking them to save him from his brother. He reminds Ginger of her family, but just then, Eris reveals their families are safe, as Rudyard is taking care of the situation. She also mentions he is a Superd, which surprises the guards, as they can't believe the calm and reliable man they talk to is a Superd. Ginger puts away her sword, finally free from Pax's control, and pledges her loyalty to Zenoba. Zenoba asks Pax to release Rudius. Rudius had used the situation to his advantage, and had promised to take Zenoba as his apprentice once he got out of confinement. He knew Zenoba was obsessed with his work, and would do anything to make Rudius his master. Zenoba breaks Pax's arm just by touching it, and makes him release Rudius. Rudyard soon returns with the guards' families and reunites them, bringing tears of joy. The people have a newfound appreciation for the Superts, which is a step in the right direction to help their reputation. It is time to leave, and Rudius helps Lilia load her belongings into a cart. She gives Rudius the box with Roxy's underpants that she had kept safe all this while, and Rudius is surprised to find a locket inside, and learns it is a gift from Sylphiette for his 10th birthday. Just as they are talking, Aisha comes running to him, and Lilia gets back in the cart to avoid giving away Rudius's secret to Aisha, who is still unaware of the fact that Rudius is her half-brother. Aisha has come with a request, and asks Rudius if she can travel with his group. She also discloses that her mom wants her to serve her half-brother, but she doesn't want anything to do with the pervert he is. She is weirdly filled with absurd ideas of using her body when she grows up to get her way. Rudius smacks Aisha on her head, and asks her not to say such things, because he feels she is much more capable than that. He gives her his headband, and asks her to keep it, so she feels close to the person she likes, the same way he treasured the box. Using the example, he clears Aisha's opinion about her half-brother, and they part ways on good terms. Rudius is astounded when Aisha apologizes for calling him a pervert, and addresses him as her big brother. He was right about her intelligence, because she figured out that Rudius was her half-brother all on her own. As for Pax and Zenoba, they were held guilty of the incident, and were exiled and sent abroad to study. Rudius, Eris, and Rudyard continue on their journey back to the Fitoa region. They reach a village, and decide to rest for the night. While Rudius cooks food, Eris and Rudyard practice swordsmanship, which looks very impressive, and even though Eris loses the match, Rudyard declares her a warrior. Eris can hardly believe it, and asks Rudius to pinch her to make sure she isn't dreaming. Rudius does as asked, but Eris is not specific about where she wants to be pinched. So Rudius takes it upon himself to choose, and pinches her chest, only to be punched in the face, and thrown into the air by Eris. The next morning, they resume their journey, and after covering a considerable distance, find themselves in the middle of a blizzard. Eris is excited to see the red dragons, and wishes to fly one, but Rudyard warns her the red dragons can be difficult to handle if they come in herds. They start talking about the 7 great powers, and wonder if they would be able to take on the red dragons, when a frightening aura takes over Rudyard and Eris. They suddenly stop, but Rudius doesn't understand, so he also stops, and stares into the mist ahead. Just as he squints his eyes, 2 figures appear through the mist, walking towards them. Rudyard warns Eris and Rudius not to move a muscle, and as the 2 people pass them, the bull carrying their luggage gets frightened, and runs away, only to fall off to its death from the cliff. Suddenly the 2 stop, and Rudyard and Eris are surprised when the man calls out their names. However, he doesn't know Rudius's name, and after apologizing for bothering them, he starts leaving. But Rudius is curious to know who he is, so he calls out to him, making Eris and Rudyard worried. Rudius introduces himself, and asks for the man's name. The man tells him his name is Orsted, and says that his dad Paul should only have 2 daughters. Orsted asks Rudius if he knows the man-god, and Rudius happily reveals that he knows man-god, when suddenly Orsted lunges at him, but he is saved by Rudyard, seconds before he is eliminated from existence. Orsted calls Rudius the man-god's apostle, and Rudyard battles Orsted, and yells at Rudius to run. It doesn't take him even a minute to render Rudyard unconscious, and just as he is about to do the same to Rudius, Eris intervenes, but gets knocked out in one blow. She is gravely injured, and bleeds from internal injuries. Rudius is frightened, and his demon eye picks up the energy orb that Orsted has created in his palm. Orsted touches Rudius on his stomach, and Rudius suddenly starts spewing blood, as if his organs were punctured from the inside. He leaves Rudius to die, and gives him a message for man-god, that dragon god Orsted will kill him. As Orsted walks away, Eris tries to attack him with magic, but she is too weak, and Orsted easily disperses it. Seeing Eris not giving up, Rudius also attacks him, and manages to get a direct hit at his hand. Rudius then gathers everything he has left, and creates a sphere with tremendous energy, and shoots it at Orsted. Before it can hit him, Orsted opens a barrier to absorb it. The spell manages to crack the gate, and Orsted compares Rudius's power with the legendary Laplace. But Rudius is too weak to keep up, and soon loses his ability to use magic. Orsted takes the opportunity to get rid of the possible threat and impales Rudius with his bare hand. Rudius is left in a pool of blood, but he only thinks of his promise to Eris. He wishes he had more time to fulfill his promise. He slowly starts increasing his magic power, determined not to die without fulfilling his promise. Eris crawls and cries out, calling out Rudyard and Rudius, while Orsted watches her mercilessly, and then decides to leave with his partner Nanahoshi. Rudius slowly loses consciousness, but he doesn't have the energy to do anything else, and soon loses consciousness. Rudius finds himself in the dreamland, where he meets Man-God. Even in his previous life avatar, Rudius has a giant hole in his chest. Rudius is calmer than usual, and tells the Man-God what Orsted did to him and his friends. He asks why Man-God didn't warn him about Orsted, to which Man-God apologizes, and explains that he can't see anything regarding Dragon God, so he didn't know Rudius would meet him. Rudius is curious to know the reason why, and Man-God tells him that Orsted is one of the cursed children. He has 3 curses on him, one of which is that he is either hated or feared by all living creatures in this universe. But Rudius says he didn't feel hate or fear in Orsted's presence. The Man-God explains, since Rudius is from another world, he is not affected by the curse. He further explains a similar thing happened when he met Rudyard, and somehow he wasn't scared of him. Rudius is surprised, and asks if Rudyard is also a cursed child. The Man-God tells him he is not, but the spear handed down by Laplace was cursed. The Supered race was handed down the cursed spears, which then spread fear of them among the people. Rudius gets annoyed, because Man-God knew about the curse, and yet sent Rudius to help Rudyard, even after knowing helping him would be useless. But Man-God clears the air by saying that the curse of the Supered race is disappearing since he shaved his head, because Laplace's hair was also green, and because of Rudius's help, the feeling of discrimination against Supereds is also diminishing. Rudius is glad his efforts didn't go to waste. However, Rudyard is no match for the Demon God, as he can't be defeated. Even if the strongest ranking god, the Technique God, shows up, Orsted still can't be defeated if he gets serious during a fight. But the curse on him doesn't let him use his full power. Rudius knows the Man-God is hiding information from him, since he knows a lot about Orsted even though he can't see him, but Rudius doesn't care anymore. He appreciates the Man-God's help all the times he needed it, but now that he has lost his life, he can't do anything anymore. He is just grateful that he got a second chance to live. As Rudius says goodbye, the Man-God stops him and says he has good news for Rudius. He isn't dead, and Rudius looks at his chest to find the hole gone. Suddenly Rudius wakes up and finds himself lying on Eris's lap. Rudius coughs up more blood. Before asking what happened, Eris explains that the woman named Nanahoshi said something to Orsted, which made him use healing magic on Rudius. Rudius looks at Rudyard resting nearby, and asks Eris about his condition. Eris tells him Rudyard is fine, and is just unconscious. Rudius can't contain the overwhelming feeling of being given another chance at life, and hugs Eris, who cries happy tears that Rudius is alive. That night, Rudius wakes up from a frightening nightmare. Rudius sees that Rudyard is awake, and he asks if Rudius is fine. After confirming he is well, Rudyard asks who Man-God is, the entity he was talking about to Orsted. Rudius explains everything to Rudyard, and also tells him about the cursed Supered spear, and that the curse is slowly fading away. Rudyard can hardly contain his tears, and Rudius goes back to sleep to give him some space. Rudyard cries tears of joy in silence, knowing all his efforts are finally paying off. The next day, they resume their journey early in the morning, and as they travel on horseback, Rudius practices the nullifying magic that Orsted had used on them, so that he is better prepared the next time he encounters Orsted. Rudius finally reaches his home, which has now turned into ruins. Rudius walks into the remains of his house, and remembers that each corner of the house holds a memory of his time with his family. The calamity has destroyed not just his home, but his entire village. As the three look at the horizon, Rudyard declares that he no longer needs to care for them. Their journey together comes to an end, and he thanks Rudius for helping him take one step toward clearing Supered's name. He then turns to Eris, who is pouting in anger. but has learned to control her outbursts. He praises her ability, and says with her talent, she'll surpass his strength someday. Eris doesn't want Rudyard to go, but she understands and makes peace with the circumstances. For the last time, he treats them like children, and places his hands on their heads, blessing them. Eris lets the tears flow as it is time to say goodbye. Rudyard tries to return the necklace that was Roxy's gift to Rudius. But Rudius asks him to keep it, because he considers Rudyard an important part of his life. Rudyard soon parts ways, and Rudius is overcome by emotions, as he has so many things to say to Rudyard, but he falls short of words. He chooses to bow and show his gratitude to Rudyard, as Rudyard walks away. Eris and Rudius continue traveling, and reach a relief camp in the Azura Kingdom, where people are still dying because of the lack of support. As they're passing, Eris notices Ghislaine in one of the tents, and goes running to her, relieved she is alive and well. Ghislaine is surprised too, but more than that, she is happy to see Eris and Rudius alive, and they embrace each other. An advisor named Alphonse joins in, and asks Rudius to wait outside while he talks to Eris, but Eris makes it clear that Rudius will stay with her no matter what. They go inside the tent, and Alphonse tells Eris that her parents and grandfather have all passed. Philip and Hilda had teleported together, and died in the strife zone, while Soros was held responsible for the teleportation incident and executed. Rudius can't believe it, but Eris stops him from saying anything. Alphonse tells Eris that noble from the Grey Rat family wants Eris to be his concubine. Ghislaine is against the decision, and argues with Alphonse for sacrificing Eris, just to satisfy a tyrant. Eris has had enough of people arguing for her, and she sends them away to be alone, and as soon as they leave, she bursts into tears. Outside, Rudius looks at the list of people missing. Zenith is still missing, and he searches for Sophiette, but when he cannot find her name in the missing list, he thinks of the worst, and looks at the list of those who have passed. He breathes a sigh of relief when he doesn't find her name on the list, and Ghislaine assures him that she might not have been found yet, which is why her name is not on the list. That night, Rudius is deep in thought while drinking, when he hears Eris's voice asking him if he has slept. Rudius invites her in, and asks her why she is up so late. Eris reminds him she has turned 15, and Rudius realizes he had forgotten about it. He asks what he can do for Eris for her 15th birthday present, and Eris asks him to become her family, since she is all alone now. She says that even though they had decided to get intimate when Rudius turned 15, she doesn't want to wait, and asks him to sleep with her. Rudius hesitates, as he feels he is taking advantage of her when she is vulnerable. Realizing Rudius is hesitant, Eris decides to use the ultimate move that she learned from her mother, and whispers in Rudius's ear that she wants to have his kittens. The wine glass drops from Rudius's hands, and before he knows it, he is on top of her. They kiss, and do things that they are way too young to do. The next day, Rudius wakes up with a huge grin, but he notices Eris is no longer beside him in bed. He thinks she's probably shy, but then he finds her red hair on the floor. He spots a letter on the nightstand. It is from Eris, and she writes that they aren't well matched right now, and so she has decided to leave on a journey with Ghislaine. Rudius runs to Alphonse, who says he has been ordered not to tell Rudius where Eris and Ghislaine have gone. Rudius walks outside, realizing he is abandoned, and cries for the first time. The next day, Eris is on a journey with Ghislaine, while Rudius is heartbroken and hardly able to get himself out of bed. In a flashback, Rudius once tried to stop bullies cutting the line at their lunch break. This made him their target, and his school life became miserable after that. He locked himself in his room and refused to go to school. His parents tried to talk to him after multiple visits to the school, complaining about the students who bullied their son. But Rudius never recovered from the incident, and in the present, he feels defeated. Alphonse visits Rudius's tent. It has been days since he has eaten anything or come out of his tent. He asks Rudius to contribute to rebuilding the town, since the rest of the people are working hard every day. He also plans to announce that Eris died in the calamity, so that the Eris isn't searched for. Alphonse hints that Rudius makes himself useful or leave the village. Meanwhile, Rudyard is on a mission to clear Supert's name, and when he saves 3 villagers from monsters, he earns their trust and appreciation, even after he discloses that he is a Supert. He even shows them his gem on his forehead, which fascinates them. At the same time, Eris and Ghislaine are on their own journey, and Eris explains how important it is for her to grow stronger, and not depend on Rudius like she had been. She hopes to meet him again someday, and until then, she plans to train really hard and grow stronger, so she can defeat the demon god if she ever crosses paths with him again. Somewhere else, Roxy and her gang have a drinking competition with Kishirika, and lose miserably. But Kishirika's joy doesn't last long, as she doesn't have money to pay for all the alcohol they drank. Roxy had passed out after a few drinks, and when she wakes up, she has to help Kishirika, and pay all the expenses herself. Kishirika is tied up, and offers to grant a wish for Roxy. Roxy asks her to pay back her money, but since Kishirika is broke, Roxy asks if her demon eye can search for the relatives of Rudius. Kishirika searches, and claims to see them. Meanwhile, Aisha and Lilia reach Milishan, and reunite with Paul, who comes running to greet his daughter. Kishirika can see them, and relays the information to Roxy. Kishirika can't find Zenith's exact location, but she tells Roxy that she is in Rapan, the labyrinth town of the Bigarret continent, and claims that she is still alive. Roxy is curious to know where Rudius is, and Kishirika tells her he is on the central continent, and looks depressed. But that doesn't stop her from laughing out loud for no reason, and suddenly disappears. Roxy decides to head to Rapan with her team. Even though she is concerned about Rudius being depressed, she believes he can pull himself out of it. In the village, Rudius thinks that sometimes, no matter how often one is given a chance to start over, they can't change that easily. In his past life, Rudius didn't want to live a depressed life, and was offered help many times, but he rejected them, because he thought those people were looking down on him. Soon people started giving up on him, and before he knew, it was too late. Nobody offered him help anymore. Rudius thinks he has had enough for today, and closes his eyes. He falls asleep, and dreams about Zenith in their house, and Norn sleeps in the crib beside her. Rudius is practicing sword fighting with Paul. Rudius remembers Zenith's smile, and her words when he offered to help clean the house, as he saw Zenith was tired. Zenith reminds him that she loves him, and soon Rudius opens his eyes. He has found his purpose to get himself out of bed. He has to find his mother, who never gave up on him. Rudius finally steps out of the tent, and starts on his journey, which he couldn't do in his previous life. Meanwhile, somewhere in a room, a gray-haired elf tells the student council about Rudius's abilities. But they refuse to believe that such a person exists. But the elf tells them that Rudius is the one who saved her, and is not just her master, but her friend. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Jobless Reincarnation. If you want to find out what happens next, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Panorama Anime, and comment for the next episode.